tell you about him. Jesus is his name, and I'm all about him. I live to bring him praise. He is the way and the truth and the life. God is 3 in 1, reigning undefeated. Our God is overcome. Jesus, Jesus.
What's up, guys? Hope y'all are having an awesome day. I am super excited to share a God goal with you that it came out of nowhere, came in a really weird way, and it's about squirrels. To just give you a basis of how weird it is, and it's about squirrels and purpose. So just to get you started, I just want to encourage you with everything today. Hope it encourages you, moves you closer to the Lord, and strengthens your faith like crazy, and also answers some questions for you. Something that I struggle with a lot is the question, what is my purpose? What has God created me to do? What is God's will for my life? And I heard it answered a while back when a pastor was talking about when younger people or people ask him, like, what is God's will for my life? He's like, that's simple. It's what you do today. It's what God's placed around you today. It's what God has placed in your life, the people he's placed in your life around you. Like, it's just today. That is God's will for your life. There's no need to worry about tomorrow, because what you do today is going to create what happens tomorrow. When you attack and be obedient to what God's placed you in today and His will for tomorrow is going to look like a fruit from that obedience. And that just helped me out a lot, because so often I get caught up and I want to see the future. I want to see it, God's will for my life written out in a plan. I want to figure it out. I want to know what it is, because I don't know about you, but surprises are hard to deal with sometimes. And it's hard to not know exactly what I'll be doing 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Like, what is God's purpose for my life? So that is a big question that I want you to dig into. Like, I don't know if that's one that you ask a lot. What is God's purpose for my life? What does God want me to do with my life? How can I impact people around me for God's glory and God's kingdom? How can I serve God? In what ways can I serve God? Just what is the purpose God has created me for? Ask some questions, because asking questions gets you curious. And when you get curious, that's when you start learning some things. That's when you start learning some new things, and God opens you up to some new answers that you may have never seen or even thought of before. That's what happened with me the other day. Literally outside, just doing some work, some writing out by the pond behind our house, and with all the leaves still on the ground, constantly I hear the pitter-patter of little feet going around, running wild, squirrels running everywhere. We've got so many squirrels behind our house. And I got distracted, and I was just looking around at them, and I was like, dang, we have so many squirrels in these woods. And I just got to watching them, and I got to thinking and asking the question, like, what does a squirrel do? Like, what is their purpose? What purpose do squirrels serve? Like, what impact could they possibly have on the ecosystem that is all around us? Like, most animals have an impact and a place and a purpose in the ecosystem that keeps it going, that keeps the circle of life going, and keeps things, like, they have a purpose and something God created them to do. Just like fish that come up and eat the algae in the water, like, keep the water clean. You got black snakes who eat poisonous snakes to keep poisonous snakes away from us. So that's their purpose. Go black snakes. We're big fans of you. You've got different purposes for each animal, and they play vital roles in the whole ecosystem and how God has created that to work. And I'm watching these squirrels, and they're just running wild, not doing anything. And I'm just thinking, what in the world are these squirrels, like, what purpose do they even serve? Because all I see them do is just running around. Honestly, doesn't look like they're doing much of anything that has any impact on anything at all. They're doing nothing meaningful. And when I asked that question about the squirrels, it came from my own question of what purpose do the squirrels serve? What purpose do I serve? What purpose has God placed inside of me to serve? And I got really curious. And like I said, being curious is a good thing, because in this day and time, we have things like Google. So I Googled, what purpose do squirrels serve? And here's the answer. Because squirrels often fail to reclaim the buried food, abandoned seeds and nuts often take root, establishing trees and other plants in new locations. Thus, squirrels play a vital role in sustaining and expanding plant communities and ecosystems. So I'm looking at these squirrels sitting outside the other day, and I'm like, they don't have any purpose. They're just running around playing all the time. They're not doing anything meaningful. Check this out. They bury seeds and nuts as their food. They often don't go back to reclaim them. They forget about them. And what that does is squirrels are living out their purpose, not just having no impact, not just doing nothing meaningful from what I thought I saw, but they have a vital role, an important role in sustaining and expanding plant communities and ecosystems. Are you serious right now? Squirrels, I was looking at them like they had no importance or purpose at all. They just run around and jump from tree to tree, make a bunch of noise in the leaves and distract me. That's their purpose. I was totally wrong. When I got to looking at it, squirrels do so much more than that. Squirrels literally plant the seeds that cause the trees to take root and grow all around us. The trees that we look at every day outside our windows, a squirrel most possibly planted those nuts in the ground that cause that tree to grow. Think about that. That's pretty crazy. That's a big purpose. But a lot hit me from that when I was thinking about my own life and our own lives, and how we ask those questions of what is my purpose? What has God called me to do? And after I looked at that answer from the squirrel and I was just blown away, I was like, I know God's word has something for us that is going to blow us away also. Because we ask these questions, we think we're just running around, not doing anything meaningful, not having any importance or purpose in our lives that impacts anything around us. But God's word says differently. So check this out real quick with me, and we're going to dig into it. The verses today, Romans 12, 1-8. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So I want to take note of this real quick. All God calls us to do, right here. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual worship. This is how we serve God. This is how we worship God, is by presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice, as laying ourselves down before God and saying, God, I don't want to sit here, and I don't want to be in control. I don't want to try to figure things out anymore. I just want to live as a sacrifice to you, and wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, whatever person you want me to serve, I want to do that, Lord, for you. And that's basically just getting out of the way. And that is our spiritual worship. And what I noticed about these squirrels is they did nothing but what they were created to do. Like, God created them to bury nuts and acorns and different things like that. And that's exactly what they do. They do exactly what God created them to do. They don't try to go above and beyond what God placed them here to do. God placed us here to be a living sacrifice. So often and this goes into the next verse, do not be conformed to this world. And Paul says this, do not be conformed to this world. He gives us this warning telling us not to do this, because so often we try to go above and beyond what God's created us to do. And we try to take things in our own hands, because what we see that we're just running around. We don't have any purpose. But on the surface, what we see, like we see that with the squirrel, It's not always what's true underlying behind the scenes, what God's actually working together in his hands. What God is working together in his hands comes in this next verse. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. So when we're conformed to this world, which Paul says do not be conformed to this world, and there's a reason for that, because so often we can get caught up in what the world tells us is our purpose, or the world tells us that we have no purpose, that we are no good, because it puts standards in front of us that we see on TV, that we see on social media, of these successful people living these big time lives, and we place standards of our lives like we have no purpose, we're no good, we have no impact on others because we're not doing as much as this preacher that we see on TV, or this preacher or person in ministry, a missionary out here doing all this thing to help all these people on social media, or this person that's changing all these lives, like this big speaker, positivity guy, self-help, all that stuff. Like we see all these successful people that have all these things that we think is successful when we conform to the ways of this world, and we think what is good, acceptable, and perfect. We see that through the eyes of ourselves and what we see, and the eyes of this world, and that just fills us with lies. It fills us thinking that we're not capable of having a purpose, that we don't have a purpose. Because when we look at the world for a definition of success and a definition of what is good, acceptable, and perfect, what we find is not what God says is good, acceptable, and perfect. And that is why Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, because when we do that, we limit what God can do in our lives. Because all we look at is what's on the surface. What we see physically is a squirrel just running around not doing anything good. But what God is doing below the surface, where he's telling us to look, do not be conformed to this world on that surface and be limited by that surface level of what we see, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect in God's eyes, what he sees, his heart. That changes. It renews our mind and transforms us to see through God's vision of what is good, acceptable, and perfect, which is deeper than what we see on the surface. So I hope that makes sense to you guys, but so often I get caught up in that myself. I look to the world to tell me what is good, acceptable, and perfect, what is the will of my life, what is my purpose. And often when we look to the world and we conform to this world, we place limits on ourselves because we can never meet the standards of others that we see all around us, especially on these media things that we have right now. We have all this time on our hands to get on social media, to get on TV, and to look to all these people and these things to tell us what our purpose is or should be, but that's not what is true. What we see as good on TV or social media is not really what's good in God's eyes. So what we need to chase after is what he's saying, do not be conformed to this world, but move aside as a living sacrifice. Move yourself aside as a living sacrifice under God and sacrifice your body to God. And be transformed by the renewal of your mind to see what God sees, to see his will, which is good, acceptable, and perfect. What is good, acceptable, and perfect in God's eyes. And when we chase that, we see not what's on the surface of people just running around or us just running around, but we see there's more to the story, that God is doing much more behind the scenes in our lives when we just sacrifice ourselves to him and we just live in the way that he's created us to live. And it's just deeper. It's deeper than just that surface level. And it takes off the limits and unleashes us to live for God and live in his ways. And it goes on in verse 3, by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment. And that's the cool thing I noticed about these squirrels, their innocence. It was beautiful because they don't even realize the impact that they're having on all these trees and all these things around them. But they're so innocent in what they're doing. They're just doing what comes natural to them, what the gifts God has placed inside of them, what God's called them to do, what they're good at. They're doing that. And that's it. They're not trying to be anything else. They're not trying to be like anyone else. like we so often try to do. They're not trying to do too much or think too highly of themselves, thinking that they can control the way they do things, that they can have their own gifts that they want to have, and try to do all these different things and control and plan and all these different things in their lives. But Paul's saying right here to humble ourselves, not to think too highly of ourselves, because when we do that, we put ourselves above God. When God says be a living sacrifice, and sacrifices are lower than God, to humble ourselves and realize that God is in control, that God can only do this. And that's something that really stuck out to me and was a huge piece of gold from all this. And I hope it really encourages you today. Let me see where it is here. There's so often we think we can figure it out. We can make plans and we can figure out God's will for our life, the purpose that He has for us. We think that we are in control and we can control that we can plan it out, we can schedule it out, we can do all these things. But at the end of the day, it's just not true. It's not what God's called us to do. Like these squirrels, I don't see them sitting in an office planning exactly where they're going to plant their nuts and where they're going to plant that may have the best harvest, because what they're doing is they're not worried about the result. They're trusting that to God, and they're living as a living sacrifice, and they're doing what God's called them to do. And they're not thinking too highly of themselves, but they're just doing what God has called them to do. Nothing more. And so often we can do that. We can get caught up in our planning and our thinking, overthinking, which I do that a lot, trying to figure it all out, figure God out, figure out the purpose for my life. But what's so cool is that's why Paul warns us here in verse 3, don't think so much. Just present yourself to God as a living sacrifice. Live with this sense of innocence like the squirrels do. They don't even realize the harvest that's coming from what they're doing. They're just doing what God's told them to do, that God's created them to do. And at the end of the day, this was the big main point that I got from this. At the end of the day, the seeds that take on the biggest harvest, that has the most growth in our lives and impacts the lives around us, are the ones we plant with no intentions of anything coming from them. It's those seeds, when we have no intentions of anything coming from them, that raise up and grow into the strongest, hugest trees that reach so many more people than we could ever imagine. When we're just living our lives, doing exactly what God created us to do, what God has gifted us to do, which going on into Romans in verse 4 through 8, for as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. We all have different gifts. We all have different areas of things we're good at, passions that God's placed inside of us. So we, through many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another, having gifts that differ and according to the grace God has given us. Let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches, in his teaching. The one who exhorts, in his exhortation. The one who contributes, in generosity. The one who leads, with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy, with cheerfulness. So he's giving these examples of gifts, and he's saying don't just have these gifts or realize you have these gifts, but find out what your gifts are and use them. So ask those questions to you today. What has God placed in your life that you're just naturally good at? Like squirrels are good at burying food, burying nuts and acorns and stuff. That's what they're naturally good at. That's what they do. That's what God's called them to do. And that's why what they do, they're successful at it. And I just want to simplify your purpose, what God's called you to, the will of your life. I want to simplify that for you today by showing you it's not so hard like we make it sometimes. We overanalyze it, overthink it, and we make it so hard and try to figure it out. But it's so simple. It's what God has placed in your life, in your heart, that you're passionate about, that you find yourself good at, that others affirm you that you're good at, and you just do that. You do what God has called you to do, He's created you to do today, in the lives of people he's placed around you today. And that's it, man. Just live. Just live. Run around, do what God's called you to do as a sacrifice to him. Not following the ways of this world or being conformed to this world, but following his ways. And just do that. That is the purpose God has given you. And that is when it's those moments at the end of the day, but we can't plant them. It's the seeds that take on the biggest harvest in our lives and impacts the lives around us are the ones we plant with no intentions of anything coming from them. We are just living, doing what God calls us to do, what the Holy Spirit leads us to do today. It's not anything we create or do. It's a result of presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice, getting our plans and wants out of the way of trying to figure things out, and just living freely in the way God called us to live. That is what brings impact to others around us. When we find our strengths and we play to our strengths. We stop trying to figure it out and just open ourselves up to what God can do in our lives. If we focus in on and just live freely in what he's called us to do. I hope that makes some sense today. I hope that's some good squirrel gold for you. And that was kind of wild, but hope you enjoyed it. Hope it answered some questions for you. And I want to encourage you one more time, even during this time where there's quarantines and you're not around people as much, and you're thinking, man, well, I have no way to use my purpose. God's giving you a way. God has always given us a way. And something we're going to be talking about this week a lot is encouraging others through technology, if that's what we have in front of us right now to do so. That find a way to use what God has given you, whether that's music, whether that's numbers. You're good with numbers, you're good at athletically, you're good at writing, whatever it is. God has given you a way to use that gift to encourage and affect the ecosystem of his kingdom in a mighty way, just like the squirrels do. And on the surface, it may not look like much. You may not see the harvest, just like the squirrels never see the harvest of the seeds they plant. But God's given you a gift. God's given you something that you are truly good at and passionate about. So let God use that by just offering yourself up as a living sacrifice, living in his ways, and just living freely and watching what God will do when you open yourself up to his will at play in your life. That's going to be exciting. It's exciting to even think about, because it's the moments where we have no intentions that God does what he does. So just enjoy the day. Hope this encourages you. Love you guys. Y'all have an awesome day. Be safe out there.
Let me tell you about him. Jesus is his name, and I'm all about him. I live to bring him praise. He is the way and the truth and the life. God is 3 in 1, reigning undefeated. Our God has overcome. Jesus, Jesus.